It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast as we talk real estate. Plenty of it. It's been a busy year, hasn't it, 2024? The amount of talking points, the way in which it all lends itself to being a difficult year. Some people have sort of obviously got ahead of the real estate market. A lot of people have got trapped within it. Yes, one gets the impression that 2025 is going to be equally busy. And it is a Friday today, the end of our working week, October the 18th. And on Tuesday, we were talking about the skyrocketing property prices in capital cities, with, of course, many buyers turning to more affordable regional areas. And this shift towards regional markets has boosted demand, leading to substantial price growth in many, many areas. And this morning, we're going to, in fact, catch up with Sarah Macaulay. She's the Executive Director of Strategy and Policy from Urban Development Institute of Australia in WA. And a very good morning to you, Sarah. Welcome to the Real Estate Breakfast this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, tell us a little bit about, some people won't know what Urban Development Institute of Australia is necessarily, and you're based in WA, so perhaps just start there for us this morning.
Yeah, thank you. So the UDIA WA is a member-based organisation. Our members are developers, both land developers and built form developers. And we've also got consultants and government agencies as members as well. And essentially, our focus is really on supporting housing supply right across the housing continuum.
And you've done a report, I think it's called the Growth Areas Infrastructure Requirements Report. Sounds a little bit technical, but in simple language, basically you've looked at those growth areas with infrastructure or developing infrastructure. Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So this report that we've recently released is a report which looks at strategic pieces of infrastructure that are required to support housing supply in a range of growth areas. It comes off the back of a piece of work we did last year called our National Housing Pipeline Project. And essentially that project was looking at undeveloped urban zoned or potential future urban zoned land across the Perth metropolitan area. And it was essentially looking at a whole range of constraints that would potentially prevent that land from being realised for housing supply. And this piece of work takes it a next step and looks at, okay, so we've got this land that we know is zoned for urban development or potential future urban development. How do we unlock that land for housing supply? Because we know we've got a critical undersupply of housing, both for our current population and our growing population. And so we looked at a range of areas across Perth Metro that we knew could deliver housing supply based on government's own plans for future growth to accommodate our population.
So on that note, what types of infrastructure is required for the region?
Yeah, so we've been looking at a range of different infrastructure types. We've very much focused on the enabling infrastructure pieces. So they are those critical pieces of infrastructure that will unlock supply rather than the infrastructure needed for sort of ongoing servicing of the area per se. But those pieces of infrastructure that we've focused on are really things like water, wastewater, transport infrastructure. So we're talking things like wastewater pump stations and trunk mains, power substations and feeder networks, intersections and road upgrades. So those pieces that really need to happen at the right time to enable development to happen on that land.
Yeah, I know that investors, they look in particular to these sorts of reports. Any report around infrastructure for an area will tell a little bit of a story of just how viable it is to develop land. This report obviously points to that because the housing crisis, as we know, is real. We talk many times to Matthew Hughes there on the ground, and he is constantly telling us that not enough land to develop. It is all about unlocking the housing supply, isn't it?
It certainly is. Yet we are in a housing crisis. We've got high demand and supply really isn't keeping pace. We've seen that we've had fewer completions of houses. Lots on the markets have gone down. So we released our own data called the Urban Development Index. And for the June quarter, we saw that lot sales were up 54% compared to the same time last year, but lots on the market were down 71%. So it really sort of demonstrates that high demand and low supply. And we also saw the ABS building activity data released this Wednesday as well, which again has shown that completions across WA in the June quarter have dropped from the March quarter, but we've also seen them significantly below long run averages. So we're looking at about 20% below that long run average.
Now, I'm not sure if you actually got the answer to this, but in terms of size of the developable land, particularly in this report, I guess you would have the total land area. What would that be?
Yeah, so we've, in our infrastructure requirements report, we've looked at 3 sort of key growth areas. So within the northeast corridor of Perth, we've looked at North Ellenbrook and Bullsbrook. In the northwest corridor, we've looked at East Wanneroo, and then in the southern corridor, we've looked at Mundajong and East Wellard. These are areas that we know have significant potential to accommodate new housing, but the infrastructure is really constraining that supply, and in terms of making sure that we're doing the planning now for the infrastructure that we're going to need, and then making sure we've got that sort of funding commitment from government to provide that certainty for developers to progress with other stages of the planning process. But in terms of the scale of what could be delivered in those areas, we've looked at it from the perspective of the number of new homes that could be delivered. So over those 3 sort of key areas that I mentioned, the ultimate potential housing delivery yield is 90,000 houses across those 3 areas. So when we say ultimate, we're talking government sort of 2050 population scenario, but we're not going to realise anywhere near that housing supply. And particularly in the next sort of 3-5 years, the housing supply that we need to see coming through in those areas if we don't get the infrastructure requirements addressed.
Yeah, okay, so you talk 90,000. In a perfect world, if everything lined up, all the ducks in a row, all of the funding came in, everybody got in behind it, how long would it take before, the first shovel is turned over in the ground, do you think?
Yeah, so some of these areas are already seeing some development in some parts, but that development sort of progress is really being held up by the infrastructure requirements. There are projects in those areas that can be starting to deliver supply. But importantly, as I said, some of this is about making sure that we've got the infrastructure commitment and funding for planning of that infrastructure at the right time as well, because it then enables the developer to progress other parts of the planning process, which are currently sort of being held up due to the way the infrastructure planning is done here at the moment. So some of it, as I said, is about, supply in the 2-3 year term, but some of that is like the 5-year sort of time horizon and beyond as well. But it's important that we get these infrastructure requirements in place. And so our report has looked at the enabling pieces of infrastructure and the initial investment that would be required by government. So we've said 420 million over the next sort of 4-year term of government needs to be committed in order to enable the planning and commencement of delivery of these pieces of infrastructure to make sure that we've got that depth in the housing supply pipeline. Because where we've got active estates currently, they're starting to trade out, and we're starting to see most of our corridors in Perth have only got about 4 years worth of supply left in active estates.
Yeah, so with that 4 or 5 year period, and I want to come back to the 90,000 homes, do you do modelling by any chance with regard to, when the end date of a project like this, if everything sort of got ticked off accordingly, how long it would take?
Yeah, so as I said, the initial sort of investment is to kickstart things and get things moving. We're not going to realise that 90,000 homes, well, any of that 90,000 homes really until we get the enabling infrastructure in place. There will be other pieces of infrastructure that will then be required to support delivery of that 90,000 over the longer term horizon, because as I said, that's government's planning for these growth areas for the sort of 2050. But really, to get things happening and accelerated, we need to look at how we can bring supply forward. And we know we've done some modelling just around population forecasting, what we're delivering in terms of supply now, what we're expected to deliver in the sort of forward pipeline, particularly over that sort of next 10 years. But we know that over the next sort of 4 or so years, based on our population growth, we're going to be 30,000 homes short of what we need. So we've got a serious problem in Perth that we need to address. And we're working collaboratively with government to look at how we can address not just these infrastructure requirements for the growth areas, but also how we can boost viability of infill projects as well, because medium and high density projects are a really important part of the housing mix and making sure that we've got that diversity in supply and to support, I suppose, affordability moving forward for consumers as well. Because, as you said earlier, we've seen prices skyrocket.
Yeah, so just lastly, I guess this is being replicated into other states in terms of this whole unlocking infrastructure?
Yeah, definitely. So all of the respective state governments will have identified key growth areas where they want to support housing for their future population growth. And our equivalents in the other states will have looked at their infrastructure requirements and needs as well, and certainly say that enabling infrastructure is a critical challenge across all of the states.
Fantastic, Sarah. Well, thank you for unlocking that and decoding it, because sometimes people look at these reports and they just sort of glaze over and not fully appreciate the depth of it. And I think you've kind of explained that pretty succinctly, pretty well for our audience. And thanks for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast this morning. Really appreciate it, and enjoy your Friday.
Thank you very much for having me.
We help to break down real estate every day to help you better understand the Australian property market. You can join the conversation every week on the Real Estate Podcast.
It is really difficult for young people to get on the property treadmill, if you will. And I would encourage anybody who has got first home buyers in their orbit to go and see a mortgage broker. They can talk about what your options are from an amount of deposit that's required. There's a lot more options out there than a lot of people are aware.
Young Australians now need a deposit 99% larger than 2012 to buy a home. I found this quite staggering. Back in 2012, a first home buyer would need almost $49,000 for a 10% deposit. Today, that figure has now jumped to over 97 grand.
Yeah, it's a significant amount of money. It takes a long time to save that. The problem with house prices is lack of supply. The government are talking about what they need to do, the number of houses that they need to build to positively impact that, but they're not building them.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.